What if the Switch 2 fails?
Boo this man!
Look, I'm not out here trying to claim that this thing is going to be a flop right out of the gate, because honestly, I don't know. None of us know. But you might want to argue with me and say, of course we know how this is going to turn out. This thing is going to be an absolute success, especially if it's just going to be a more powerful Switch that's already enticing. You might have a point there, but this has happened to Nintendo before. They used to be on top of the world with the Nintendo DS and the Wii. The Wii was selling gangbusters, the DS became the second best-selling game console of all time, so there's no way Nintendo is going to fumble the bag with the next generation, right? Well, come the 3DS and Wii U era, everything went south. The 3DS did well, but not nearly as well as the DS, and the Wii U tanked miserably, selling only 13.5 million units in its entire lifespan. I am just saying Nintendo is not immune to any of their systems flopping. But before we get into what would happen if the Switch 2 flopped, let's get into how it could exactly. What is it about the system that could possibly prevent it from being nearly as successful as the Nintendo Switch, which, need I remind you, is the third best-selling game console of all time? Well, history has shown that whenever Nintendo comes out with a successor to one of their consoles, it always sells less than their predecessor. The Super NES did not sell as well as the NES. The GameCube not as well as the Nintendo 64. The Wii U, you know how that turned out. This also applies to their handhelds as well, with the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS to the 3DS. It's almost as certain as the sun rising in the morning. This always happens, and I'm inclined to believe it's going to happen with the Switch 2 as well. Maybe I'm wrong and the Switch 2 outperforms the Switch by miles, but I have a few good reasons as to why I don't think this will happen. The first reason being that the handheld home console hybrid is not nearly as exciting now as it was in 2017. But Joey, you don't even know if this thing is going to be a handheld home console. Of course it is. Really? Why wouldn't it be? Nintendo would be foolish to not continue capitalizing on that handheld home console hybrid success. Also, calling this system a Nintendo Switch successor basically confirms that this is going to be a continuation of the Switch concept. Back during the Wii U days when they said they were working on the Nintendo Switch, or rather NX back then, they called it something completely new. They're not calling the Switch successor something completely new, therefore it's going to be a hybrid. Anyway, back to my original point, the Switch, when it came out, was a bombshell of a device. Sure, it wasn't as powerful as the PS4 or Xbox One, but it was still a really cool system. I remember bringing it to work with me, and people were really impressed by the visuals of Breath of the Wild on what was essentially a tablet screen. But now that we're 7 years removed from the launch of the system, people aren't as impressed as they were. Not just because the Switch on its own is a 7-year-old device, but we're also seeing studios like Valve and Lenovo make their own portable PCs. Heck, even PlayStation released the Portal. Yeah, it requires an internet connection to use and you're not playing the games natively, but I haven't heard any complaints from Portal owners, and it's actually been selling quite well. Yeah, the Switch really impacted the market, as you can tell by devices like the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, the PlayStation Portal. Of course, the Switch is still coming out on top thanks to its ease of use and, more importantly, price point, but that goes to show when the Switch 2 is revealed, I have a feeling a large majority of Switch owners are not going to jump on board day one, because they already have a portable gaming system and they're just not as impressed as they used to be when they got it. Which brings me to reason 2. Most of the 140 million Switch users don't really care that much about having better graphics, or rather a more powerful Switch device. I wouldn't doubt if millions of people bought their Switches just to play 1 or 2 games. Remember when people bought Switches along with Animal Crossing New Horizons in droves? Almost as if they suddenly got a lot more free time in March 2020? Chances are a lot of them are going to see the Switch 2 and ask themselves, why would I want to buy a Switch 2 when my current Switch plays Animal Crossing just fine? It's the same reason most PS4 owners haven't upgraded to a PS5 yet. They see big PS5 games like God of War Ragnarok also come to PS4 and think, is it really worth it to spend over $500 just to see more of Kratos' beard hair?
No.
And I think that's going to happen with the Switch 2 as well. A lot of Switch 2 games are also going to release on Switch 1 because Nintendo can't afford to ignore that user base within the first few years of the Switch 2's life. That's kind of what we're going to see with Switch 2, even if the Switch 2 doesn't sell as well as the Switch. And like I've said earlier, we've seen this happen with Nintendo's previous consoles. Although a lot of people do care to upgrade to the next machine, a lot of them believe their current hardware is fine and think, why even bother upgrading? Still, it is ultimately better for Nintendo to go the Switch 2 route, release a Switch that is more powerful than the previous one, because ultimately more people will still be interested than if they did something completely out of left field. A lot of Switch 1 owners are going to upgrade to the more powerful model, even if a lot of other Switch users are going to just stick with their current Switches. As long as they keep buying games for either platform, Nintendo doesn't care. They're going to make money either way. So even if the Switch 2 isn't necessarily going to be a flop, I really think it's not going to sell as well as the current Switch because of those reasons. But what would exactly turn the Switch 2 into a flop? Well, let's think about the Wii U. What exactly made this system a flop, even though it's the successor to their most popular home console of all time at that point? Well, for one, the gimmick was very confusing. They didn't market this thing properly because they focused on the giant tablet screen and not the console it came with. So people really thought, hey, this is just a tablet accessory for the Wii, I don't need this. Not to mention most game developers didn't really know what to do with it. So if the Switch 2 was to have a gimmick as confusing as that might turn a lot of people off. Will this system have a gimmick? Who's to say? There's been patents of scrollable shoulder button wheel things, which doesn't really sound like a game-changing feature or anything, but I also don't think it's going to be enough to really turn people off or turn people on to the new system. But I think what could potentially really hurt the Switch 2 are the games themselves, or lack thereof. Nintendo did recently say that game development is going to be more complicated in the future, as we can tell now with the PS5 and Xbox Series X. Those games have been chasing graphical fidelity, and as a result, they take like 4 to 6 years to come out, which is just not sustainable in its own ways. I go over this more in my last 2 videos, Realism is Killing Gaming and Iwata Predicted This, so if you want to know more, feel free to check those videos out. So if Nintendo kind of falls into that similar trap and we don't get nearly as many exclusives on the Switch 2 as we've gotten with the Switch, then that could also be a potential system killer. I'd like to think that won't happen though, because Nintendo has so many teams making games and the Switch 2 is still theoretically not going to be as powerful as the new system, so the developers won't be working with too many complicated systems. But you know, I could be wrong. Maybe game development becomes harder on the Switch 2 and as a result, we don't see that many more games coming out for it, thus killing the system dead in its tracks. But you know what? Maybe Nintendo will flub the marketing on this thing very badly. They've done it with the Wii U. Maybe they could do it with the Switch 2 if they don't clearly communicate that this is a brand new Switch and not something like a new model or what have you. It depends on how much that thing actually looks like a Switch. If it looks different enough, maybe they could get away with it. But most importantly, that name. And I really think it is dangerous to call it anything other than a Switch 2. Although I'm fully expecting Nintendo to call it something else like a Super Switch or a Switch Deluxe or what have you, I really think they gotta nail the name of this system. Switch 2 already drives that point home. It is the second version of the Switch. There's a reason why PlayStation has been using numbers for darn near 30 years now. But you know what's more important than the Switch successor's name? Subscribing to GameXplain and hitting that notification bell. Really, it helps us a lot. So now, let's say all of that comes true. The system has a stupid gimmick, the games aren't coming out for it, and the name of the console is just not clear and concise. The system has flopped, it's only sold 30 million units, maybe less, I don't know. What happens to Nintendo then? Will they declare bankruptcy? Are they gonna go under? Are we playing Mario games on PlayStation? What's happening here? Well, none of that's happening. They're fine. Nintendo's going to be absolutely fine if their next system is a Wii U level flop. Mainly because they're in a better position now than they were before the Wii U even came out. Yes, the Wii and DS sold like gangbusters, but still, even though those consoles were successes, Nintendo was not nearly as profitable then as they are now during this Switch era. And it's not just because of the Switch, it's for other reasons, like their theme parks in Universal, their movies that they're coming out with. They're profitable for so many reasons beyond games, and their brand is stronger than ever before. It's going to take a lot more than a console flop to bring this giant mega corporation down. But still, video games are their most important export, and when you don't have a console that's selling, you're putting a lot less games out there. So what does Nintendo do? Well, they do the same thing they did during the Wii U era. Come up with another completely different sort of machine. That's where the Switch came in. I have been saying this for years as a die-hard Wii U defender back in the day. You can never underestimate Nintendo, and now look at where they are. Most profitable than they've ever been. People are not only buying the Switch in droves, they're also playing their Switches, as shown in recent financial reports. So I really don't think Nintendo could survive another console flopping. They can survive maybe 4 consoles flopping. That's how insanely rich they are. That was a point actually brought up a lot during the Wii U era when they were struggling. Nintendo has so much money, this console is not going to kill them in the slightest. Well, now they have even more money, so they can survive a lot more Wii U's at this point, I'd like to think, at least. They're essentially the ones who shaped this industry into what it is today, and I'd like to think that even though they've made a few missteps, they ultimately know what they're doing in the grand scheme of things. They know how to handle an underperforming console, they've done it before, and if the Switch 2 underperforms, they will most certainly bounce back on their feet as well. Now, do I honestly think that the Switch 2 is going to be a flop? I really do not. I think Nintendo has earned a lot of goodwill this past 7 years with the Switch, to the point where millions of people are going to be tuning in to see what the future for Switch holds with the Switch successor, which we're calling Switch 2, and we're going to keep calling it Switch 2 unless Nintendo gives it some different name. I guarantee you the system will not sell as much as the original Switch, but I still think it's going to sell a lot more than the Wii U, GameCube, and Virtual Boy combined. But let me know in the comments. I want to know what you think would happen to Nintendo if the Switch 2, for some very strange reason, became an absolute flop for them. Let me know your theories in the comments below, and until next time, bye-bye.